"Don't marry her, she is a scammer," said the poor black maid. What the millionaire did next was shocking. The story begins on a rainy afternoon in Atlanta, Georgia, when thunder rolled across the sky and the streets shimmered with silver reflections. Inside a grand estate on the edge of the city, guests in expensive suits and glittering gowns were preparing for the engagement party of the year. The mansion belonged to Jonathan Reed, a self-made millionaire known for his success in real estate. Despite his wealth, Jonathan wasn't the typical flashy man. He carried himself with quiet dignity, preferring honesty over glamour. Tonight, though, was different. He was preparing to announce his engagement to Victoria Hayes, a woman who had captured his heart in less than a year. The air buzzed with excitement as guests whispered about the upcoming wedding. Some admired Victoria's beauty and charm, while others questioned how someone so mysterious had appeared so suddenly in Jonathan's life. Still, the sparkle of her diamond ring and her perfect smile silenced most doubts. But not everyone was convinced. In the corner of the grand dining hall, near the entrance where servers bustled with trays of champagne, stood a woman in a plain uniform. Her name was Lillian Carter, a maid hired through an agency to help with the event. Her face carried the fatigue of long hours and hard work, but her eyes were sharp and watchful. She had seen things others missed. The way Victoria's smile faltered when no one was watching, the hushed phone calls she made in hidden corners, and the cold calculation in her gaze when Jonathan wasn't looking. Lillian knew something others didn't, something dangerous. And as she placed glasses on the table, she whispered to herself, "Don't marry her. Please, God, don't let him marry her." Earlier that day, Lillian had overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. She had gone to the upstairs balcony to collect linens when she heard Victoria's voice through the cracked door of the guest bedroom. Victoria had been speaking on the phone, her tone icy and businesslike. "Yes, the wedding is on schedule," Victoria had said. "Once the paperwork is done, his assets will be easy to access. A few months, maybe less. I told you, he's completely smitten. After that, we'll split the money, and I'll disappear." Lillian froze, her hands clutching the folded sheets to her chest. She could hardly breathe as Victoria laughed softly before hanging up. The reality struck Lillian like a knife. Jonathan Reed was walking into a trap, blind with love. But who would listen to a maid? Now, as the party swirled around her, she wrestled with the decision. If she spoke up, she risked losing her job and being humiliated in front of people who saw her as invisible. If she stayed silent, Jonathan's future, and perhaps his life, would be ruined. She thought of her own children, waiting for her back home in their small apartment on the south side of the city. She knew what it was like to be deceived and abandoned, and she couldn't let another good man fall into that kind of pain, no matter how rich or powerful he was. The music quieted as Jonathan walked into the room. He wore a tailored navy suit, his presence commanding yet warm. Applause erupted as he placed his arm around Victoria, who looked radiant in her emerald dress. Jonathan raised a glass, ready to toast their love. And that was when Lillian's heart pounded louder than the rain against the windows. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong enough to cut through the silence. "Mr. Reed," she said. The room fell still, all eyes turning toward the maid standing at the edge of the crowd. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to continue. "Don't marry her, she is a scammer." Gasps rippled through the hall. Jonathan blinked, lowering his glass slowly. Victoria's smile stiffened, her hand tightening around his arm. "What did you just say?" Jonathan asked, his voice calm but edged with surprise. Lillian swallowed hard. "I shouldn't be here, and maybe no one will believe me, but I heard her. I heard her talking on the phone upstairs. She's planning to take everything from you, the wedding, the money, all of it. Please, you have to listen." The room erupted in murmurs, guests whispering to each other in shock. Victoria's face flushed red, but she quickly composed herself. She let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. "This is ridiculous," she said smoothly. "Jonathan, she's a maid. Do you really think I'd waste my time with such nonsense? She probably wants attention, or money. Some guests nodded, their eyes narrowing at Lillian as though she had committed a terrible sin by speaking. But Jonathan didn't dismiss her. His gaze stayed on Lillian, searching, weighing her words. He had built his fortune by reading people, by knowing when someone was lying. And something in Lillian's eyes, her raw sincerity, her fear, made his chest tighten. Why would you say this? Jonathan asked quietly. Lillian's throat tightened, but she stood her ground. Because it's the truth. And because I couldn't live with myself if I let you walk into it blind. Victoria scoffed, stepping closer to Jonathan. Darling, please, don't let this ruin our night. She's making up lies. Look at me, do you think I would ever hurt you? She pressed her hand against his chest, her eyes glistening with feigned tears. The guests waited, the tension so heavy it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Jonathan finally spoke. Everyone, please excuse us for a moment. He gently removed Victoria's hand from his chest and looked at Lillian. You. Come with me. The room buzzed as Jonathan led both women out of the hall and into his private study. The door closed behind them, muffling the noise of the party. Inside, the fire crackled, shadows flickering across the polished wood. Jonathan turned to Lillian. Tell me exactly what you heard, he said firmly. Lillian's palms were damp, but she repeated every word of the phone call she had overheard. She explained how Victoria had laughed, how she had mentioned splitting money with someone else. Her voice cracked, but her conviction never wavered. Victoria crossed her arms, her eyes flashing with fury. This is absurd. Jonathan, she's lying. I've devoted myself to you, to us. She probably made this up because she's jealous or desperate. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He studied both women, his mind racing. On one hand was the woman he thought he loved, the woman who had filled his empty mansion with laughter. On the other was a maid, poor and weary, who risked everything to speak up. The silence stretched until Victoria finally broke it. Jonathan, if you love me, you'll believe me over some servant. That word, servant, hit Jonathan like a slap. He glanced at Lillian, who stood quietly, her eyes brimming but proud. And for the first time, he saw not just a maid, but a woman of courage. Jonathan took a slow breath. Victoria, leave us. Now. Her face darkened, but she forced a smile. Of course. I'll be outside when you're ready to come to your senses. She swept out of the room, her heels clicking angrily against the floor. When the door shut, Jonathan turned back to Lillian. If what you say is true, then you may have just saved me from the worst mistake of my life. But I need proof. Can you help me get it? Lillian hesitated, then nodded. I'll do whatever it takes. And with those words, an unlikely alliance began, between a millionaire who had almost been deceived and a maid who had nothing but her courage. Neither of them knew that the truth they were about to uncover would not only change Jonathan's future but also Lillian's life forever. That night, after most of the guests had left, Jonathan stayed in his study, pacing in silence. Lillian sat nervously across from him, twisting her hands in her lap. She hadn't meant to be in this position, face to face with a millionaire whose life she had just turned upside down, but she also knew she couldn't take back what she had done. Jonathan finally stopped pacing. Lillian, he said, his voice softer now, you understand what you risked by speaking up tonight? Yes, sir, she answered. I know I could lose my job. I know everyone thinks I overstepped. But I've seen what lies do to a family. My kids, they already don't have a father. I couldn't let you walk into the same kind of heartbreak. Her honesty struck Jonathan deeply. He pulled a chair closer and sat across from her, studying her face. She looked tired, worn from years of struggle, yet there was a strength in her eyes that impressed him more than the jewels and smiles Victoria had ever shown. Then we need to find proof, he said at last. "I don't want to accuse someone without evidence. But if she's really planning this, she won't stop now. She'll slip up again." Lillian leaned forward. "I think I know how. She's careful, but not careful enough." Earlier, when she was on the phone, she mentioned meeting someone in a hotel downtown. If she's really working with someone, she'll try to see them soon. Jonathan's brows furrowed. "Then we follow her." The next few days were tense. Victoria played her part flawlessly, smiling at Jonathan, sending him affectionate messages, even visiting his office with home-cooked meals. To outsiders, she looked like the perfect fiancée. But Jonathan's eyes were open now, watching every move, noticing how her affection seemed rehearsed, too polished. One evening, while Jonathan pretended to be tied up in a business meeting, Victoria dressed carefully in a black coat and left the mansion. Jonathan had arranged for a driver he trusted to follow her discreetly, with Lillian by his side. They watched from the back of a tinted car as Victoria entered a small hotel on the edge of downtown. 10 minutes later, a tall man in a leather jacket walked in after her. Jonathan's stomach twisted. "Do you recognize him?" he asked. Lillian shook her head. "But look at them, she's too comfortable." Through the window of the hotel cafe, they saw Victoria laughing with the man, leaning close, her hand brushing his arm. At one point, she slipped a folder across the table. The man opened it briefly, then nodded. Jonathan's jaw clenched. "That's enough." But Lillian touched his arm gently. "Not yet. If you confront her now, she'll deny everything. We need to know what's inside that folder." Jonathan exhaled sharply but nodded. They waited until Victoria left the hotel, then Jonathan called one of his security men, instructing him to discreetly track the man she'd met with. The following day, the truth began to unfold. The man was identified as Anthony Wells, a small-time con artist with a history of fraud cases. And the folder? It contained copies of Jonathan's financial records, accounts Victoria could only have accessed through documents she had stolen from his office. When Jonathan held the copies in his hands, rage burned in his chest. Yet beneath the anger, there was also a deep sadness. He had truly believed Victoria loved him. Now, it was clear she loved only his wealth. That evening, Jonathan sat once again in his study with Lillian across from him. "You were right," he said, his voice heavy. "She's been planning this from the start. I was blind." Lillian's eyes softened. "You're not blind, sir. You just wanted to believe in love. We all do." He looked at her for a long moment, the words sinking in. She wasn't just a maid, she was a woman who had known betrayal, who understood pain, but who still had the courage to stand for truth. "Now the question is," Jonathan said quietly, "how do we end this?" Lillian hesitated, then spoke carefully. "If you just confront her, she'll twist it. She'll cry, she'll lie, and some people will still believe her. But if you let her reveal herself, if you let her think she's winning, then you can expose her in front of everyone." Jonathan leaned back, considering her words. "You want me to set a trap?" "Yes," Lillian said firmly. "Because the truth deserves to be seen, not just whispered." Over the next week, Jonathan and Lillian planned carefully. Jonathan pretended to be more affectionate with Victoria than ever, giving her the impression that nothing had changed. He even spoke publicly about moving their wedding date sooner, which thrilled her. But behind closed doors, Jonathan was preparing evidence, gathering everything his investigators uncovered about Victoria's schemes and her partner in crime. Lillian helped where she could, quietly slipping into rooms Victoria used, checking her calls, even intercepting one message that mentioned offshore accounts. She moved silently through the mansion, unnoticed by most, yet she played a role larger than anyone could have imagined. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. Jonathan invited friends, business partners, and family for what he called a pre-wedding celebration. The mansion buzzed with chatter, just as it had on the night Lillian first spoke up. Victoria was radiant, basking in the glow of admiration, certain that her plan was unstoppable. But Jonathan had prepared something different for this night. As the crowd gathered in the great hall, Jonathan stood beside Victoria, smiling as though nothing was wrong. He raised his glass once more. "Tonight," he said warmly, "I want to thank all of you for supporting us as we take this step toward our future. But before we move forward, I feel it's important to share something very personal. Love is not just about trust, it's about truth. And truth has a way of revealing itself, even when people try to hide it." Victoria's smile wavered slightly, but she forced it back. Jonathan gestured toward the large screen at the front of the room. The lights dimmed, and a video began to play. The guests watched in stunned silence as hidden camera footage appeared, Victoria in the hotel cafe, sliding the folder across the table, laughing with Anthony Wells. Then came recorded phone calls, obtained legally, where her voice was cold and calculating, discussing how she and Anthony would split Jonathan's fortune. Gasps filled the hall. Victoria's face drained of color. Jonathan turned to her, his voice steady. "Victoria, would you like to explain?" The room went silent, all eyes on her. She stammered, reaching for words, but nothing came out. The perfect image she had built crumbled in seconds. Lillian stood quietly near the back, her heart pounding. She hadn't wanted attention, but as people began to realize what had happened, their eyes turned to her. They remembered the maid who had dared to speak the truth when no one else would. Victoria tried one last desperate attempt. "Jonathan, please, this isn't what it looks like. He tricked me, I didn't mean." Jonathan's voice cut her off. "Enough. You've had your chance. Pack your things and leave my house tonight. You won't get another dollar from me." With that, security escorted her out, her cries echoing through the hall. The guests whispered in disbelief, some shaking their heads, others murmuring praise for Jonathan's composure. But Jonathan's eyes weren't on them. They were on Lillian. As the hall cleared, he walked toward her. She lowered her gaze, unsure of what to say. But Jonathan gently lifted her chin, his expression filled with gratitude. "You saved me," he said softly. "Not just from her, but from myself. I was chasing a dream that wasn't real. You reminded me what honesty looks like." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes. "I just did what anyone should have done." "No," Jonathan said firmly. "You did what most people would be too afraid to do. And for that, I'll never forget you." That night marked the end of Victoria's scheme, but it was only the beginning of something neither Jonathan nor Lillian could have predicted.